Hello and welcome to Intuitive Journey with Desiree. I am Desiree Holmes-Shirini, your host. And thank you for being here. And I have, as I mentioned in my last podcast about my summer experiences, some stuff I want to share with you on something that I did experience after losing sight in my left eye. So just as a recap, during the summer, I had an event, put me in the hospital, and I had 2 surgeries. And following or during the first surgery, there was an accident that caused sight loss in my left eye. And when you know, in the days after that event, there in ICU, I experienced what would be called hallucinations. And I just wanted to share these with you. I think I commented on my last episode that it was maybe a little more metaphysical. I think some was. I think some might not have been. And because I didn't, when I shared these things with the doctors, and I knew they were not real, I even said to the doctor, so if I see things, but I know they're not real, is that still a hallucination, right? Because it wasn't like I really believe something was there. I could tell it wasn't there, that it was different. So I'm going to go into that description because 2 reasons to share, because it was really fascinating. And sometimes still I can choose to see some of this stuff, but it's not constant. And I remember being in the hospital saying, well, this is really interesting. It's pretty cool. I'd like to choose, though, when I see it and when I don't, be able to turn it on and turn it off, because there was nothing frightening for me. It was just like, wow. And I'm anyway, but part of what I want to share here is that I found that there's actually a syndrome or a thing that happens to people who are losing eyesight, and especially in particular, if somebody suddenly loses eyesight, that this sort of stuff could happen. And after learning that in a follow-up with the doctor, I told him, hey, have you ever heard of this syndrome? And he hadn't, and he's a neurologist. And I'm sure he's experienced this anyway. But so it's little known as a syndrome, but some of what I experienced, I'm not sure it was part of the syndrome. Who's to say, right? So let me start with what I experienced. So on the ceiling were some panels in my ICU room. And of course, I'm laying like this for the most part, just staring at the ceiling. And with my eyes open, I would see these things. And the panels on the ceiling, it was almost as if I'm watching, flat screen TV. And what I would say on the panels on the ceiling, and they would mesh in and out of each other, not the panels, but the images, were people. And it was in black and white, like watching a sharp, screen, black and white TV. And it was people, and all of them were as if they were at like a speakeasy. Their clothes, their hair, the ladies' jewelry, like a choker. And we're talking like 1930s era, late 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s. It was like watching characters out of a Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movie almost, that sort of look, if you're familiar with that look. There even came a man through with a top hat on, which was, I thought, well, that's not quite the same era, but if he's really dressed, I guess he might be wearing a top hat. Men in bow ties and tuxedos and, perfectly put together. And the ladies, oh my gosh, cigarette holders. And they were interacting as if I was just, as if I was a ghost floating around and seeing these different people someplace. And it wasn't just once, it was ongoing. Anytime I wanted to look up there was action going on. And that action was happening on the ceiling on these panels. Other stuff was happening in the room. So these characters were only when I was observing the panels. And what was so interesting about the visuals, it, like I said, it was like black and white TV, but the jewelry and some of the, like if somebody had diamonds on or something, it was as if the light just shone right through them. It was sparkling and white, like white light on, some of this stuff that they were wearing. Very sharp images, very distinct, and movement, and no auditory stuff, just seeing as if they were talking to each other. And then, like, one lady's face might kind of, disappear, and another face might come in. And I wish I could animate it and show it to you. Now, as well, if I stared at it sometimes, or with eyes shut, and this sometimes still happens, I would see lots of grid-like patterns, lines, geometric shapes, and they were straight lines, straight, very sharp-cornered geometric shapes, and mostly lines, intersecting lines, straight up and down lines, and diagonals. And it was almost as if it was drawn with light through the black. So once again, like the lady's sparkling jewels, it was light and very, very, not even very white, but like white. So, those black boards that you could do scratch art through, right? It's black and then you scratch the lines through. It was sort of like that, but where the lines would have been scratched would have had like light shining through. So it didn't glow, but it was so bright that it was as if these lines were made of light. So that was the other thing. And now if I looked around the room, there were people. There was a window over here beside my bed, and outside the window, although I was up too high for this to have been true, I would see people outside the window. I would see people walking out of the bathroom and into the hallway. Um, one time the nurse is in there with me, and I'm sitting up, and I can see the floor, and the floor was sort of like a gray tile. And there was a small piece of paper, like a little piece of paper that had come off the corner of a page or something, out in the hallway that I could see through my door. And as I'm looking down at the floor past her, not even looking at the floor, but I see the floor past her as if there's water on it. It would be sort of like if you've ever had something overflow in your kitchen and there's this film of water, but it's moving, not like a river rowing, moving forward, but you could see the water kind of moving as if there's a source, and it's maybe only this deep. And I see the water moving on the floor, so realistic, so like there's water on the floor. But I knew there wasn't water on the floor. And I don't remember if I said anything to her. And that little piece of paper that was on the floor grew little black legs and started to crawl through the water. And luckily, I also knew that little piece of paper did not turn into a bug with little black legs. Actually, I found it kind of entertaining and humorous. I'm like, well, look what that just did. Isn't that interesting in my mind? But sometimes talking to a doctor or a nurse who's standing there, somebody would pass behind them. And I would say, and I don't think pretty soon I stopped telling them when I was seeing these things, because I thought they were just going to transfer me right into the loony, soft padded hospital if I just kept reporting all the things I was seeing. But I told them I knew it wasn't there, but this is what's going on in my mental field, as if it's my visual field. People walking back and forth. I mean, not just cloudy shapes of people that all in black and white, though. That was the difference. They were in black and white, except for And this is where I shift into the more metaphysical, except for the off to my side over on my left side, which interestingly is the eye that I lost the sight in. I just thought of that. But there was a little girl, and she looked like from the 30s or 40s, little brown, soft brown hair, like cut in a little bob with a little bit of a wave at the bottom. Probably, I would say, 7 years old. Pretty little girl with, she looked like a little girl out of a magazine from that era. Little yellow dress, that comes in at the waist, and there's probably a name for it, but a dress of that period with the little sleeves and, sorry, noises from my telephone. Little sleeves and, the band of white under the puff sleeves, little white collar, buttons down the front, and little yellow dress, soft yellow like butter. And she was off to my side, and she was there for a couple days, and said her name was Marjorie in my non-spoken word. So it wasn't, I didn't hear it, but I heard it in my mind. I mean, I knew it. Does that make sense? And like, okay, and after a couple of days, I'm thinking, Marjorie, you don't need to stay here. This is like a hospital room. And I began to wonder. Of course, I was laying in an ICU while I'm experiencing all these things. And I said, Marjorie, I didn't say this out loud, I hope. I don't remember saying it out loud. I said, you don't need to be here. It's a lot more pleasant. You'll have a lot more fun if you find the light in the room and you go and find that light and go to the light. I guess, it seemed to make sense to me at the time to help her find the light, go to the light. I'm doing, finger quotes in the air for those of you listening on podcast. And it sounds a little corny, but I'm thinking Marjorie, poor thing, is hanging around here, and she can go. And I point up to the corner of the room where I'm seeing like a area of light, like there's a sense of a flashlight up in the corner of the room that wasn't really there. And I point, and she looks up there, and it was almost as if she kind of floated in that direction. And then I saw her little hand reach out from the corner as if she'd gone behind the wall, and as if her little hand reached out and waved goodbye to me. And I'm like, bye, Marjorie. And she never appeared again. So I guess that worked. And I don't even remember much about the timing and the days, as I was laying there in the hospital one day, just meshed into another. But as I mentioned in my last episode, talking about my experience of change, that while I was in the hospital, my dad passed. And having had the grace of an experience with my mom coming to see me after her passing, as well as my godmother making herself known the day she passed, I and working as a psychic medium for others and having people come through, I was really like wondering and disappointed that my dad didn't come through, or where was he? And I still don't know what this was, if it was him visiting or if this was just some other strange episode, but it was different from all the others. And it was, of course, as I was laying in bed thinking of him and wishing that he would visit, but it certainly wasn't what I was expecting if it was him. I was expecting to, have a visual of him or hear his voice or have some evidentiary, thing, like someone come in and say something that only he would have known or said. But instead, I'm laying in bed, and down beside my bed, off to the side, I see this shooting of steam come up from beside my bed, sort of like, when a tea kettle is really hot and you can see the steam just shooting up, but even more strongly than that. And I thought, what in the world is that? So much so realistic, so much that it did seem real this time, that I leaned over as much as I could over the edge of the bed to see where it was coming from. And there was nothing there for anything to be coming from. And just after that started, then the whole room started to fill with steamy mist. And from that episode, and I will add here that was another experience. That was a specific, shooting steam, and then it just like steam would happen, it kind of expanded from that spot and then kind of dissipated. So that's another on the metaphysical side of my experience. And I'd like to think it was my dad doing his best to say, yes, I'm here. But one of the other things that I did experience while in there with these shapes and forms and people and Marjorie was that the room would just get this misty overlay, and it would undulate, almost like not as thick as, say, like flying through the clouds, because I could see through it, but it was just as if the dense fog would fill the room and move around. And this was with both eyes open. Now, my other eye, still sees, but it was seeing this misty thing too. So it was just a really unusual and fascinating experience, I would say, a very different. So, as I said when I began this, was it the drugs? Was it the ICU? And as I was laying there, I thought, well, this is the ICU. Like, how many people didn't leave the ICU? But the room was, the hospital and the room seemed modern enough. And I haven't looked it up still, but I asked one of the nurses, I said, do you know how old this building is? She goes, oh, it's pretty old. But I haven't looked it up. It would be interesting to see when the original structure, or if there was a hospital on that spot back in the time when these costumes or outfits would have been popular. Were those past ICU residents, or was I just off on a party? Was it metaphysical? Anyway, so on the other hand, as I started to say before, that with sudden sight loss, there can be this syndrome that some people experience. And I am going to pull up some information on that so I quote it properly. And it's very little known, and doctors don't know about it. People that experience it, it can happen with sudden, apparently, or decreasing eyesight. If someone's experiencing a decrease in eyesight, these hallucinations may happen to them, but not the same. However, what's interesting is that period dress, that for some reason, people, not dressed like I saw, but there was reference to this having happened for some people that like might have macular degeneration or eyesight loss that is getting worse. And they're seeing things and they're afraid to say anything to their doctor, especially if they're older, because it gets mistaken for dementia, or they think the person's crazy. And also, with what I was seeing with the people in the room, they would be behind people, or around beside. They were very occupying my 3D space appropriately. The geometric shapes, however, were as if they were on, I'm segueing back so you understand what I was about to say next, were as if there was a plexiglass in front of me with these things going on and the light coming through, but they were transparent, as if they're overlaid and I'd be talking to you, and these 3D geometric, not 3D, but they were 2D geometric patterns would be happening, but I could filter them out as I was looking at someone, because they weren't really there. They were just this translucent thing in front. And so they say with this particular syndrome that usually it's that other experience, that it seems as if it's just, layered in front of, your actual real experience. And the grid-like stuff that I was seeing is not unusual. So what this was, and I'll get back to the description I was talking about, it's excuse me while I zoom in. I think I can see. I gotta zoom in nice and big so I can see it with my one good eye. And that's another, it's just weird that sometimes it's easier than others, but it's not easy. Okay, sorry, I turned it to zoom in and now I can't find it. I apologize. And I may or may not go back and edit this or just let you suffer with me. Here we go. There it is. Charles Bonnet syndrome. And actually it's pronounced Charles Bonnet. He was a Swiss naturalist who first documented this in 1760, when his grandfather, who was 89 years old, was nearly blind from cataracts, and described seeing people, birds, carriages, and buildings that didn't exist. So since 1760, and it's documented, but so many people just haven't heard of it. Doctors even haven't heard of it. So I think this is like a public service for anybody out there to know that there's a thing that can happen to people as they are losing their eyesight. Now, for me, like I said, sometimes if I want to, I can choose to stare, like I can choose to sort of I can unfocus even when I'm not wanting to, because everything it's still weird. So I can easily return to these patterns, and I'm about to tell you more on that. Not so much the people, those period dressed people, not so much. Sometimes faces come in or that sort of thing, but not I'm not at the nightclub there anymore. And the descriptions, let me see if I can go back, because I tried to highlight and save this description. Well, what it does say in this one little article I found was that brick-like patterns and geometric lines are common, and it says if they're laid in front. So that would fit for that part of my experience. And I still, interestingly, like I said, see things sometimes when I want to, sometimes when I'm not trying to. A lot of times if I'm laying in bed, I can look at the ceiling, and if I just stare off, I will see them still. But there's been a shift. It's not the straight lines, not the geometric forms, but since I've been home, those lines have become more organic, and they might be making shapes that undulate or move, or more like, I would say, bird shapes or wing shapes, worm shapes, not in a creepy worm way, but that sort of thing. And the lines are making the shapes, and I probably will get around one of these days to drawing it. But again, they're not so much like they're on a black background as they're on any background, like usually white or dark, usually on a solid background. Or once again, if I just stare off into space, even if I'm looking at something, it will be like an overlay. And it's a bit fascinating just to watch and see what comes and goes. Sometimes shapes of faces come in and go out. And I have not tried to take time to sit and meditate since I got home, but I anticipate that when I do that purposefully, meditation, instead of just laying down in the morning and at night and just taking the breaths, but purposely taking a meditation, that there might be some really interesting imagery and maybe even information to come out of these visions. So that might be the bright side of the dark side of one eye. See what, one thing could be, well, if I lost the physical sight, maybe the third eye is opening up. And that would be a direction that I would choose to explore as an interest. Who knows, right? So that was what I wanted to share with you, and that this experience is pretty fascinating, and we'll see what comes of it. I'll make another episode if I choose to use this, let's call it a new ability instead of a disability. From my disability, my new ability, I'll let you know in a future episode what I see. Thanks for being here on Intuitive Journey with Desiree, and I'll look forward to sharing more next time. Bye.